true paranormal horror stories you shouldn't listen to alone. It starts with a gentle vibration you might write off as a passing truck. But then it grows, a violent thrashing from beneath your bed, as if some monstrous, unseen hand has grabbed hold of your sanctuary and is trying to rip it apart with you still in it. Tonight's story comes from a viewer named Mark, and on the surface, it's the kind of story we all dream of. He, his wife Sarah, and their two young children, 6-year-old Leo and 4-year-old Mia, had finally saved enough to buy their forever home. It was a beautiful older house on a quiet, tree-lined street in a small Ohio town. It had character, a huge backyard, and plenty of room for the family to grow. The moment they walked through it, it just felt right. What they didn't know was that something else had already claimed it. Something ancient and deeply unwelcoming. For a few weeks, their new life was idyllic. The kids' laughter echoed in the halls. Sarah started a garden, and Mark spent his weekends painting. They were building their future, pouring all their love and hope into the very walls that would soon turn against them. The American dream. But as many of you listening know all too well, sometimes a dream house is just hiding a nightmare, waiting for the right family to move in. The first sign was so subtle, you'd barely notice it. A whisper, a faint, wispy sound, like the end of a sentence spoken in the next room. Mark would be in his workshop and hear it, thinking Sarah had called for him. She never had. Sarah would be in the kitchen and hear a soft murmur from the living room, only to find it empty. "Did you say something?" became a common question in the house, and the answer was always a confused no. They dismissed it, of course. It's an old house. Old houses make noises. It's the wind, the foundation settling, the pipes growing. Every strange sound had a logical, comforting explanation, because the alternative was just too terrifying to think about. But the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to happen only at night, after the sun went down and the shadows took over the house. They were never clear enough to understand, always just on the edge of hearing a phantom sound that left a cold feeling behind. Mark and Sarah would be lying in bed, reading in the quiet of the evening, and a soft, breathy whisper would snake into the room, hang in the air for a heart-stopping second, and then vanish. They'd look at each other, eyes wide, the same unspoken question hanging between them. But they never talked about it. To give it a voice would be to give it power, to admit that their logical explanations were starting to feel like lies. They simply turned off the light, held each other a little tighter, and hoped for a quiet, dreamless sleep. But the thing in their home was just getting started. It was testing them. And soon, the whispers would be the last thing on their minds. The first real escalation happened in Leo's room. One night, Sarah was woken up by his crying. She found him sitting bolt upright in his bed, his face pale in the dim glow of his dinosaur nightlight. When she asked him what was wrong, his answer sent a chill down her spine. "My bed was dancing," he sobbed, his little body trembling. She soothed him, telling him it was just a bad dream. She checked the sturdy wooden bed frame, found nothing wrong, and tucked him back in. She told herself it was just the overactive imagination of a 6-year-old. A week later, it happened again. This time, Leo came running into their bedroom, completely terrified. "It won't stop shaking, Mommy," he cried. Mark went to investigate. He stood in the silent room, just watching, waiting. Nothing. He sat on the bed, bounced a few times, and declared it perfectly safe. They let Leo sleep on their floor that night, chalking it up to recurring night terrors. But their carefully built wall of denial started to crumble when it began happening to their daughter, Mia. She was too young to really explain it. She would just wake up screaming, pointing at her little toddler bed. Then one evening, as Sarah was tucking her in, she felt it herself. A faint, but unmistakable, vibration. It seemed to pulse up from the floor, right through the legs of the bed. It only lasted a few seconds, but it was real. Now they were scared, They started searching for answers. The plumbing? A plumber came and found nothing. An earthquake? A quick search showed no tremors in their area. A nearby train? The closest tracks were over 5 miles away, much too far to cause a vibration that only shook the children's beds. The whispers were changing too. They weren't faint murmurs anymore. They were becoming clearer. Sarah was home alone one afternoon when she heard a voice, plain as day, whisper her name right behind her. She spun around, heart pounding, to an empty room. Mark, working late in the garage, heard what sounded like faint, mocking laughter just outside the door. That feeling of being watched became a constant presence. A cold dread started to fill their home, clinging to the air like a bad smell. They weren't just living in the house anymore. They were sharing it. The real terror arrived on a Tuesday night, just after midnight. Mark and Sarah were ripped from a deep sleep by a sudden, violent lurch. This wasn't a vibration. Their king-sized bed, a heavy, solid oak frame, had lifted inches off the floor on one side and slammed back down with a deafening crash. They scrambled out of bed and flipped on the light, their minds reeling. The room was still. Nothing was out of place. But the raw, physical power of what had just happened was undeniable. The entity in their house was done with whispers and shivers. It was showing them what it could do. It was showing them how helpless they really were. From that night on, the attacks were a nightly ritual. The shaking would start as a low hum and escalate into a brutal, chaotic thrashing. The bed would buck and slam against the floor, shaking the whole room as if an invisible giant were trying to break it to pieces with them in it. They dragged their mattress into the living room, too terrified to sleep in their bedroom. But it didn't matter. The phenomenon followed them. The couch would vibrate. The floorboards would tremble. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were voices. Guttural, angry voices coming from all directions at once. They heard their names being hissed from dark corners. They heard threats, spoken in a language that was almost English, but twisted and nightmarish, filled with a pure, raw hatred. The children were inconsolable. Their laughter was gone, replaced by a constant haunted look in their eyes. Their home, once their dream, had become their prison. Stories like this are a chilling reminder that we're not always alone, even in the safety of our own homes. The veil between our world and whatever lies beyond can be terrifyingly thin. If you have a story you'd like to share, or if you want to hear more accounts that will make you think twice about the noises you hear in the dark, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Their final night in that house was the breaking point. A storm was raging outside, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside. The family was huddled together on the living room floor, surrounded by blankets and pillows in a makeshift fort that offered zero protection. The activity was worse than it had ever been. It felt like a siege. Every door in the house slammed open and shut with violent force. The TV turned itself on, blasting static at full volume, and the voices were a nightmare symphony, a legion of hateful spirits all screaming at once. Then the shaking started again, not just their mattress, but the very floor beneath them. It trembled and groaned as if the house itself were in agony. Cups and plates rattled in the kitchen. A picture frame flew off the hallway wall and shattered. Leo and Mia were screaming, burying their faces into Sarah's side. In that moment, something inside Mark just snapped. The fear he had been swallowing for months erupted into pure, desperate rage. He scrambled to his feet, shaking with adrenaline, and screamed into the darkness, "Leave US alone. What do you want from US?" And just like that, the chaos stopped. The slamming doors, the static, the shaking floor, the screaming, it all ceased in an instant. A deep, heavy silence fell over the house, and that silence was more terrifying than any of the noise had been. It felt hungry, expectant. Then, from the darkest corner of the room, a single voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a scream. It was calm, cold, and perfectly clear. And it spoke one single word. You. The evil in that one word was absolute. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of ownership. It was the sound of a predator that had finished playing with its prey. That was it. That one word broke them. They didn't pack. They didn't grab their wallets or phones. Mark grabbed the kids. Sarah grabbed the car keys. And they ran. They burst out the front door into the pouring rain and left everything behind. The furniture, the toys, the dream. They drove 3 hours to Sarah's parents' house and never, ever went back. They hired a moving company to pack their things and sold the house at a huge loss to a property developer, whom Mark later heard tore it down. They never told the realtor or the new owner what happened. How could they? Who would even believe them? In his email to me, Mark wrote that the terror ended the night they fled, but the psychological scars are still there. The kids had nightmares for years. Sarah still flinches at any sudden noise in the middle of the night. And Mark admits a part of him never really left that house. He says the fear it planted in him is a cold thing that still lives in his gut. He doesn't know what was in that house, a poltergeist, a demon, some horrible echo of a long-forgotten tragedy. All he knows is that it was intelligent, powerful, and evil. His warning to everyone is simple. Don't ignore the small things. The faint whisper, the object that isn't quite where you left it, that feeling of being watched. Because sometimes it isn't just the house settling. It's something else. Settling in right alongside you. The four walls we call home are supposed to be our sanctuary. But Mark's story is a horrifying reminder of what happens when that sanctuary is breached by something we can't explain. It makes you ask a deeply unsettling question. What unseen things might settle into a house long before you ever turn the key? And what do they do when they decide they don't want you there anymore? If you have an experience with the unexplained that you need to get off your chest, leave it in the comments. For more true paranormal stories, subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the next one. Sleep well. The fluorescent man. There is no silence like the silence of an office at 3 a.m. Not the peace of a sleeping house, nor the hush of a library. It is a mechanical silence, a buzzing emptiness stitched together by the ceaseless drone of fluorescent lights. I had been working security in the Delmer Financial Building for 2 months before I realized the lights never went out. Every other tenant, every desk, every copier was dark. But the lights themselves, the pale tubes that lined each endless corridor burned eternally, humming like anxious insects in a glass jar. My job was simple. Walk the halls, sign the logbook, pretend I mattered. I thought I had grown used to the insomnia bright glow that bleached every surface. But then the nights began to change. The first time, I saw him on camera 3, just a faint reflection at the far end of corridor G. A man standing under the buzzing lights, motionless, wearing what looked like my uniform. I leaned forward, squinting. The grainy image shivered and warped. When the frame cleared, he was gone. I told myself it was nothing. Shadows, static, a trick of the feed. But that night, walking corridor G, I felt it. The lights flickered. Only for a fraction of a second. But in that blink, I knew I wasn't alone. The second time, it was worse. I was drinking burnt coffee in the lobby, scrolling my phone. When I looked up, the glass doors at the far end reflected something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, standing under the lights behind me. My own outline, but taller, straighter, its skin pale as paper. I turned. Nothing. Only the hollow hum of fluorescence. After that, I started to notice other things. My reflection lagging a half-second behind me in the darkened windows. The lights overhead buzzing louder when I passed. The creeping sense that every corridor was leading me back to the same spot. no matter which way I walked. The logbook began to fill with words I didn't remember writing. Whole sentences scrawled in my handwriting, describing places I had never been, machines I had never seen. Always ending with the same phrase, "He is closer now." One shift, the building lost power. Not for long, just 30 seconds. But in those 30 seconds, I saw the truth. The fluorescence died, and in that blackness, something else glowed. A figure in the hall, not made of flesh, but of light itself. Veins of burning white traced through its skin. Its eyes were twin bulbs, buzzing faintly. The hum I had lived with for months was coming from him. When the light snapped back, he was gone. But the afterimage remained, burned into my eyes like the ghost of a camera flash. From then on, he was everywhere, on every monitor, in every reflection. Sometimes 2 steps behind me, sometimes waiting at the end of the hall, never moving, never speaking, just closer. By the 8th week, the hum of the lights was unbearable. It filled my skull. It drowned out my thoughts. I begged my supervisor to transfer me, but she just smiled vaguely and said, "No one leaves the Delmer shift early." That night, I came back from patrol and found the logbook already open. A message waited on the page, written in my own handwriting. "Tonight, you meet him." My flashlight flickered as I walked the halls. The fluorescence hummed louder. I turned a corner and froze. He was standing there at last, the fluorescent man. Up close, he looked like me. Same uniform, same posture. But his skin was translucent, a living lamp, veins glowing beneath like circuits. His grin was stretched wide, unnatural, too bright, as though carved into the light itself. When he spoke, his mouth never moved. The sound came from the buzzing above. "You wrote me." My throat locked. "What?" "You gave me pages, walked the corridors, fed me with hours. Now I am here." The fluorescence crackled, dimming, brightening, dimming again in sync with his words. "I'm not," I whispered. "I'm not writing anything." His head tilted, a stuttering mechanical twitch. "Every word you think is a line in my book. Every shift you serve is a page in my body. You are the author of your own erasure." And then the flashlight died. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was his grin, wide and searing, etched in every reflection. 1,000 mouths of light, all smiling. When morning came, they found the logbook open on the desk. My uniform folded neatly on the chair. They didn't find me. But they say, if you walk the Delmer building at night, you'll hear the hum change. It becomes a voice, deep in the lights, whispering with static. Some guards swear they see a second shadow, stretched long and pale, following just a step behind. They don't stay long. No one does. Except him, the fluorescent man. The man in the freight elevator. I took the job at Calder Industrial Storage because it was quiet. No customers, no bosses breathing down your neck. Just an endless grid of concrete floors and corrugated metal units that stretched for blocks, silent as a mausoleum. My duty was simple. Sit in the lobby booth, monitor cameras, and patrol the floors once an hour. They warned me about the freight elevator on the north side. "Don't use it after midnight," the day supervisor said flatly. "If you hear it moving, don't answer it. Just let it run its course." I laughed. Old machinery makes noise, right? But he didn't laugh back. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. The cameras showed row after row of locked storage units, all tagged with numbered placards. The halls smelled faintly of rust and oil, and the fluorescent tubes buzzed like dying insects. The elevator was old green painted steel with a heavy sliding gate, but I avoided it just to humor the warning. My patrols took me past its doors, though, and I swear I could feel cold air leaking from the cracks, as though something vast and underground was breathing. At 2 in the morning, the building always felt different. The silence pressed on me like weight. My flashlight beam looked weaker than it should, barely pushing back the shadows. Still, the pay was good, and nothing truly out of place happened. Until my 15th night. At 2:17, just as I was finishing a patrol, the freight elevator shuddered. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was wet, dragging, like something heavy being hauled up a rope slick with slime. The camera feed glitched. Black static, then a frame of the elevator's doors trembling, as if someone was pounding from the inside. I froze in front of the monitor. No one had swiped in that night. No trucks, no workers. Then the elevator began to rise. The little analog dial over the doors ticked up. B2, B1, B3. I didn't move. My chest felt locked. When it stopped on floor 3, the feed cut out. The screen filled with static, white noise hissing like a broken radio. But faintly, God help me, I heard breathing in it. Slow, ragged, like lungs filled with dust. My training screamed at me to call it in, but the radio only gave static. Cell service had always been bad in the concrete bunker of a building, but now it was just dead. I forced myself into the stairwell, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Every step up to floor 3 felt heavier, like the air was pressing down against me. When I pushed open the steel door, the hall looked wrong. The lights were on, but dimmer, tinted with a yellow hue instead of their usual white. The row of units stretched out in both directions, but the numbers were reversed, counting down instead of up. And at the far end of the hall, the elevator door was open. The gate was pulled aside, revealing only blackness. I should have turned back, but some awful gravity pulled me forward. Halfway down the hall, I noticed the floor. Wet footprints bare feet led from the elevator, each print glistening like oil. They trailed toward a unit door 3 rows down. That's when I saw him. A man, impossibly tall, his shoulders nearly scraping the ceiling. He wore a filthy gray coverall that sagged on his frame like wet paper. His face was wrong stretched, slack, like clay half melted in the sun. He stood in front of the unit door, hands pressed against the lock. His head tilted toward me, slowly, unnaturally, as though his neck had too many joints. And then he smiled. Not at me, through me, as if acknowledging something behind my eyes. I broke. I ran back toward the stairwell, heart hammering. The wet slaps of bare feet followed. Not running, just stepping, each one impossibly long. Closing distance, like the hallway itself was shrinking. I hit the stairs and slammed the door behind me. The echo of the metal rang down the concrete shaft. I didn't stop until I was back in the lobby booth, gasping. The monitors flickered. Camera 3 showed the man standing in the hall, head tilted. His smile widened until the skin cracked at the corners. Black fluid dripped from his mouth, pooling at his feet. Then, without moving, he was suddenly closer to the lens. The feed froze on his face, filling the whole screen with that ruptured grin. I pulled the plug on the monitors. Silence. Darkness. And then the elevator groaned. From the lobby, I could hear it descending again. Past the basement floors, the dial wasn't even supposed to track. B3, B4, B5. It didn't stop. The sound of the cables creaked deeper, lower, until it seemed to be pulling something up from beneath the earth itself. I left the building that night. Just walked out, left the booth unlocked, the cameras dead. I didn't even pick up my last paycheck. Weeks later, I tried to look the place up. Calder Industrial Storage had no record of existing. No tax ID, no business listing, like the building had been erased. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the groan of cables outside my apartment window. Not in the air, but beneath the ground. And last Thursday, on my kitchen floor, I found wet footprints. Bare, oversized, leading straight from the window to my bedroom door. I worked night shift at McDonald's, and the fryer started talking. There's a special kind of quiet that falls over a McDonald's during the graveyard shift. It's a world of lonely hours, with just the hum of the freezers and the endless job of cleaning up after a day's chaos. You get used to the solitude. You even start to find a weird comfort in it. There's a predictable rhythm in the dead of night. Wipe, sweep, restock, repeat. You get to know the building's personality, the groan of the ice machine, the rattle of the vents when the air kicks on. You become a part of the silence. But the one thing you never get used to is when the silence starts to whisper back. For me, it started with the deep fryer, its bubbling grease a constant hypnotic sound in the empty kitchen. At first, I was sure I was just tired, that the long hours were playing tricks on my mind. But then, the whispers started to form words. And then, it whispered my name. My name is Leo, and for about 6 months, I was part of the skeleton crew at the McDonald's on Route 9. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was okay, and the quiet was a nice break from my crowded college classes. Most nights, it was just me and Maria, a woman who'd been working there since before I was born. She handled the drive-through and front counter while I was king of the kitchen. After 2 in the morning, customers were rare, just the occasional trucker or a car full of restless kids. That huge, brightly lit space pretty much felt like our own private island in a sea of asphalt and darkness. The routine was my anchor. Maria would put on a little radio by the register, usually some soft rock station, and I'd start the closing checklist, breaking down the shake machine, scrubbing the grill until it gleamed, mopping the sticky floors. The last and most hated task was always cleaning the fryers. It's a greasy, smelly, thankless job. You have to drain the old, dark oil, scrape the gunk from the heating elements, and get it all ready for the morning rush. The 3 fry vats sat side by side like sullen, metallic triplets. They were old, scarred up from years of use, and seriously temperamental. Even when they were off, they'd make these little pinging and ticking sounds as the metal cooled. The soundtrack to all this was the low, gurgling bubble of the active vat, which we kept on all night for the rare fry order. It was a sound I'd gotten so used to it, just became white noise, the heartbeat of the empty restaurant. I must have worked 100 of these shifts without anything weird happening. It was boring, it was tiring, but it was safe. I liked that, the predictability. But that all changed on a Tuesday night in October. Maria had called in sick, which almost never happened. My manager, Dave, a guy who was always stressed out, said he couldn't find anyone to cover. He told me to just lock the main doors and handle the drive-through by myself. "It'll be dead," he'd said over the phone. "Just stick it out. You'll be fine." So there I was, totally alone. And for the first time, the silence wasn't comforting. It felt heavy. Every hum from the freezer and every creak of the building seemed 10 times louder. The place I knew so well suddenly felt alien bigger and a lot emptier. The fluorescent lights cast long dancing shadows that my tired eyes kept mistaking for movement. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just being solo for once that was getting to me. I put in my headphones, cranked up a podcast, and focused on my checklist. It was time to clean the fryers. I started with the 2 cold vats, draining the oil and scraping the grime. The work was methodical, mindless. It was around 3 in the morning. I just finished the first 2 and turned to the last one, the one that was still hot and bubbling. I switched it off, letting the oil settle before I started to drain it. As the furious bubbling died down to a thick, gentle simmer, I took my headphones off to give my ears a break. And that's when I heard it. A whisper. It was so faint, I almost missed it. It sounded like air escaping a pipe, or maybe the radio from the front, turned down so low you could only hear static. I stood perfectly still, just listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the ice cream machine and the soft sizzle of the cooling oil. I shook my head. Asterisk exhaustion. That's all it is. Asterisk I'd been awake for nearly 18 hours. Of course, I was hearing things. I turned the valve to drain the hot oil. It poured out slowly, a thick, dark stream into the filter below. The sizzling sound changed as the oil level dropped, becoming more of a wet crackle. And then I heard it again, clearer this time. Leo, a switch flipped inside me. Everything went cold. I froze, my hand still on the valve. That wasn't the radio. It wasn't the pipes. It came straight from the fryer in front of me. The sound was gurgled and wet, like someone trying to talk underwater, but the word was unmistakable. It was my name. My heart hammered against my ribs. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding tiny and shaky in the huge kitchen. Is someone there? Only silence answered. I slowly straightened up, my eyes darting around the kitchen. I checked the back door. Locked. I peeked out into the dining area. Empty. The chairs were stacked on the tables. The only movement my own distorted reflection in the dark windows. I was completely, totally alone. It has to be the drive-through speaker, I thought, a frantic surge of logic taking over. Asterisk. Sometimes it picks up stray radio signals, chatter, stuff like that. It's an old system. Asterisk. I rushed over to the drive-through station, my hands trembling a little. The speaker was silent. The power light wasn't even on. My logical explanations were running out fast. I just stood there for a full minute, my mind racing. I was overtired, stressed from being alone. It was a hallucination, a waking dream. It had to be. But deep down, a raw primal fear was starting to take hold. I walked back to the fryer, determined to just finish my work and get the hell out of there. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. I grabbed my scraper and leaned over the now empty vat. The metal was still hot, radiating a shimmering heat. As I lowered the scraper toward the bottom, the voice came again. This time it was louder, more insistent, bubbling up from the drain where the last of the oil was dripping. Don't clean me. I stumbled back, the scraper falling from my hand with a loud clatter that echoed through the kitchen. I couldn't breathe. My whole body was shaking. This was not in my head. The sound was real. It was a thick, syrupy whisper, and it was coming from the fryer. The words were slow, drawn out, formed by the popping and sizzling of the grease left behind. Who are you? I whispered, my voice barely a sound. For a moment, there was just the hum of the restaurant. Then, a single large bubble of oil burst from the drain hole with a loud pop, and the gurgling voice answered, asterisk, hungry. I was paralyzed by a fear so absolute it was like being encased in ice. My brain just refused to process what was happening. A machine, a deep fryer, was talking to me, and it was hungry. My flight or fight response was screaming, telling me to run, to sprint out the back door and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was completely mesmerized, horrified. Asterisk. What? What do you eat? The question tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop it. The sizzling from the fryer seemed to get louder, the sound twisting into something that almost sounded like a low, raspy chuckle. It was a grotesque, greasy sound that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Asterisk. Things that fall in. Things that are given. My mind flashed all the little things that had accidentally fallen into that vat over the last 6 months. A plastic pen. A stray cleaning cloth. Once, a whole bag of frozen fries slipped from my hands and vanished into the bubbling oil. Was that what it was talking about? Been here a long time, the fryer whispered, its voice seeming to get stronger, more confident. Asterisk. Before the golden arches. Before the road. Ground is old here. Ground is hungry. The temperature display on the fryer flickered erratically, flashing random numbers before landing on 666 for one terrifying second, then going dark. A wave of nausea hit me. This was wrong. This was a real-life nightmare. I started backing away slowly, my eyes locked on the fryer. I had to get out. My brain was finally catching up to my terror. My shift didn't end for another 2 hours, but I didn't care. I would leave everything, run to my car, and just drive until the sun came up. Asterisk, leaving so soon, Leo? The voice bubbled, a hint of malice in its tone. Asterisk, we were just getting to know each other. I know things about you. I hear the whispers of all the night workers, the lonely ones, the scared ones. The lights in the kitchen flickered once, then twice. My heart felt like it was going to pound its way out of my chest. This thing in the fryer wasn't just some weird fluke. It was intelligent. It was malevolent. And it knew I was alone. Suddenly, the fryer erupted. The oil at the bottom, which should have been almost gone, started to bubble violently, spitting and hissing like a nest of angry snakes. Asterisk, feed me. It roared, the sound a horrific mix of sizzling grease and guttural rage. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a demand that vibrated through the floor. The fryer's metal body started to shake, and a foul, acrid smell, like burnt meat and sulfur, filled the air. That was it. The spell of terror broke, replaced by a pure, animal need to survive. I turned and sprinted, not even thinking about my stuff or locking up. I fumbled with the handle on the back door, my hands slick with sweat. As I finally yanked it open and burst into the cool night air, I heard one last, chilling whisper from the kitchen behind me. Asterisk, you'll be back, Leo. They all come back. I didn't stop running until I hit my car, slammed the doors locked, and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving burning rubber behind me. I never went back. I left my last paycheck, my uniform, everything. I called Dave the next morning from a payphone 20 miles away and told him I quit. I didn't give him an explanation. I'm sure he thought I was crazy. Sometimes I think maybe I am. It's been years now. I finished college, got a desk job, and I live a completely normal life. But I haven't eaten at a McDonald's since. I can't even stand the smell of fast food cooking. Every time I hear the sizzle of oil in a pan, a cold dread washes over me, and I can almost hear that wet, gurgling whisper. The memory has never faded. It just lingers, like the smell of old grease. A constant reminder of the night, the silence of the graveyard shift was broken by a terrible, hungry secret. A secret that's still bubbling away in the deep fryer on Route 9. If you've ever had a weird experience on a late-night shift, I'd love to read about it in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories that will make you question the world around you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening. A security guard's midnight encounter that still keeps me up. You know how some memories fade? They get soft around the edges, lose their bite, and just drift away. But others dig their claws in and refuse to let go. They become a part of you, a dark little room in your mind you can never turn the light on in. I've been a security guard for 15 years, seen a lot of strange stuff. But what I saw that night in the old, abandoned school, what was sitting in that armchair, it wasn't just strange. It was evil. And even now, the memory of it, the feeling of it, is enough to keep me staring into the darkness all night long. Honestly, the job was as boring as it sounds. I was watching over a defunct school complex on the edge of town, a place left to rot for a good 10 years. It was a ghost of a place. 3 main buildings and a few portable classrooms, all boarded up tight. My patrol was a joke. Drive the perimeter, double-check the locks on the gates, and make sure no bored teenagers were trying to throw a party. Most nights, the biggest fight I had was with falling asleep. The night shift is its own kind of weird. Your whole world shrinks to the dashboard lights and the crackle of the radio. You get real familiar with being alone. That kind of quiet can play tricks on your head, making every snapped twig sound like a footstep. You're constantly fighting your own body, fighting off sleep, and living with this low-grade stress that just becomes your new normal. That complex had a personality, especially after dark. It was heavy with this deep, oppressive silence, the kind that feels like it's smothering you. The main building, a 3-story brick beast, just loomed over everything like it was watching my every move. The other guards who'd worked the site all had their stories lights flickering in buildings with no power, feeling like they were being watched, finding chairs moved. I always blew it off. In this job, you can't have an overactive imagination. It's just shadows, the wind, old buildings making noises. I was paid to see what was there, not what wasn't. I was dead wrong. The shift started out normal. I did my first sweep, the only sound for miles being the crunch of gravel under my tires. The air was cool and dead still. I pulled into my usual spot, where I had a clear view of the main gate and the long path up to the buildings. For the first few hours, it was business as usual. I drank lukewarm coffee, listened to some late-night talk radio, and watched the moon do its thing. Then, around 1 a.m, the first weird thing happened. A light flickered on the second floor of the main building. One quick flash. It was so fast, I almost talked myself out of it. A reflection? A trick of the light. But the power had been cut to that place for years. I just stared at the window, my heart starting to thump a little faster, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. After 5 minutes of staring at a black rectangle, I shook my head. It's the night shift, I told myself. Your brain's not working right. About an hour later, I heard something. It was a faint, scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy table across a wood floor. It sounded like it came from one of the smaller lodges, set way back from the main path. Again, I tried to explain it away. An animal? The building settling? Every excuse sounded flimsy. A cold feeling started to creep in, that being watched feeling I used to laugh at. It was prickling the skin on the back of my neck. The clock on my dashboard read 2:17. They call it the dead time for a reason. That's when the night is at its absolute darkest, and it's when my night fell apart. A loud bang echoed from that same lodge. This wasn't some faint scrape. This was sharp, violent. It was the sound of a heavy door being slammed shut with everything you've got. My blood turned to ice. Every single instinct was screaming. That building wasn't just locked. It was sealed shut, doors chained, windows boarded from the inside. There was no way anyone or anything was in there. I grabbed my big flashlight, its beam shaking as it cut through the night. What do you even do? The handbook says investigate. Your training says assess. Your gut, your ancient caveman DNA says get in the car and go. My boots felt like they were made of lead. The walk to that lodge was the longest I've ever taken. Every crunch on the gravel sounded like a firecracker in the dead silence. I got to the door. The chain was right where I left it, padlock still on. The door jamb was thick with dust and cobwebs, totally undisturbed. And then I heard it again. Bang! Louder this time, because I was standing right in front of it. I felt it through the door. A solid thump in my chest. Something was in there, and it knew I was standing right here. My hand was trembling as I keyed the radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 42. Possible unauthorized entry at the Old Northwood Lodge. I'm checking it out. The static that came back wasn't much comfort. I was on my own. Taking a shaky breath, I unlocked the padlock and unwound the chain. The door groaned open, and a wave of pitch-black, musty air hit me. It was the smell of decay, of time and dust. I swept my flashlight inside, cutting into the darkness. It was an old staff lounge, frozen in time and covered in a thick blanket of gray neglect. The room was mostly empty, just some overturned tables and junk. But right in the middle of the room, facing away from me, was a single huge armchair. One of those old-timey wingback chairs, fabric all faded and ripped. And something was in it. It wasn't a person. I don't know how to explain it. It was just a shape. A mass of shadows that seemed to drink the light from my flashlight. It was a hole in the darkness. A spot that was blacker than black. I couldn't see a face or arms or legs. Just a dense, man-shaped silhouette slouched in that chair. I was frozen solid. The air in the room dropped, getting so cold it hurt. This wasn't just a chill. It was a coldness that felt wrong. It was coming from the chair. A wave of pure, concentrated evil that just washed over me. I've dealt with violent people, dangerous people, but I have never felt anything like this. This wasn't anger. It was an ancient, bottomless hatred. It was a wrongness that sucked all the life and warmth right out of the room. I couldn't breathe. I was completely paralyzed by a terror, so real it felt like a physical weight. My brain was just a looping scream of, "Run!" But my body was locked up. I just stood there, my flashlight beam shaking, aimed at that silent, sitting thing. Then it started to shift. It didn't stand up like a person. It just rose. A slow, fluid motion, like a shadow peeling itself off the fabric of the chair. And as it rose, I heard that sound again, a third, deafening bang. But this time, it didn't come from hitting anything. It came from inside of it. It was the sound of its own power, its own presence. It didn't have to touch a thing to slam a door in my soul. That sound broke the spell. Pure adrenaline hit me like a lightning bolt, and I just reacted. I didn't think, I didn't plan. I stumbled backward, fell hard onto the gravel, and just crab-walked away, my eyes locked on that black doorway, just waiting for the shadow to spill out after me. I scrambled to my feet, and I ran. I didn't stop until I was back inside my car, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't radio anyone. I didn't even think about a report. I just floored it to the main gate and got the hell out of there without looking back. I found a payphone 10 miles down the road and called my supervisor. I told him I quit. He started yelling, threatening to fire me for abandoning my post. I told him to keep the job, the paycheck, all in it. There is not enough money on this planet to make me set foot on that property again. The fear I felt wasn't about getting hurt. It was the soul-deep horror of knowing I had been in the same room as something that shouldn't exist. Something truly, fundamentally evil. I've never told anyone the full story until now. I mean, how do you explain a feeling? How do you describe a presence that just radiates pure hate? People would say I was tired, that the night shift was getting to me, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. That memory is burned into my brain. Some nights, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I can still feel it. That cold that goes straight to your bones. That crushing sense of absolute wrongness. I can see that high-backed chair in that dusty room, and the shadow sitting in it. It's the one thing that still keeps me up at night, the one ghost that never went away. Have you ever seen something you just can't explain away? A moment that left you feeling cold long after it was over? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want more stories from the dark, be sure to like and subscribe. You never know what's waiting out there. Reddit's most unexplainable true glitch in the Matrix stories. Have you ever had a moment that just stopped you in your tracks? A glitch in the Matrix so bizarre that logic and reason completely fail to explain it? These aren't your typical ghost stories. They're stranger. They're those little moments where the code of our world seems to skip, repeat, or just break down entirely, leaving the people who experience them forever changed. We've scoured the internet for these accounts, told by ordinary people who have witnessed something truly extraordinary. Picture this. You're home alone and decide to hop in the shower. The water's running. The mirror is fogging up. You step in, and a second later, your foot slips. It's a hard fall. You crack your head, Your neck slams against the edge of the tub, and everything fades to black. The very next thing you know, you jolt awake. But you're not on the cold, wet bathroom floor. You're in your bed. Your hair is bone dry. You're fully dressed, and the house is silent. There's no sign of a fall, no pain, just the bone-chilling memory of something that, according to all physical evidence, never actually happened. This is just one of the true stories we're diving into today, accounts from people who believe they have slipped through the very cracks of reality. Our first story comes from a Reddit user, and it's an experience so profound it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's the story of a man who lived, loved, and lost an entire family, all in a life that may have never been real. It started pretty horribly. The user explains he was assaulted by another man and knocked unconscious. But what happened next wasn't just a fade to black and a trip to the A. Instead, he woke up. He was on a couch, and a woman was there with him. She was beautiful, and he felt an overwhelming sense of love from her. Looking around the room, he noticed a strange lamp he'd never seen before, but everything else felt right. He quickly learned that this woman was his wife, and they had 2 children together. He had a job he liked, a home, and a life filled with all the little beautiful moments that make us happy. For 10 years, he lived this life. He watched his kids grow up, shared inside jokes with his wife, and felt the full spectrum of human emotion. But that lamp, that one weird lamp in the living room, always bothered him. It just felt wrong, like a single dead pixel on a perfect screen. One day, he found himself staring at it, completely transfixed, and as he stared, the lamp started to warp. Its shape began to shift, growing wider and deeper right before his eyes. The world around him started to dissolve into noise and chaos. He could hear screams and distorted voices as his reality, the life he had known and cherished for a decade, crumbled to pieces. Then he felt an intense, agonizing pain. The first words out of his mouth were, "I'm missing teeth." He had finally woken up for real. He was lying on the pavement, paramedics all around him. He had only been unconscious for a few minutes after the assault. His 10-year life, his wife, his children, none of it had existed. He was rushed to the hospital for his injuries, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the grief he felt for a family that lived only in his mind. He was left with a question we can never answer. Was it all just an incredibly detailed dream brought on by head trauma? Or did he somehow slip into a parallel world and live another life, only to be violently ripped back? The Reddit account was deleted shortly after he posted the story, leaving the world with this terrifying account. But these glitches aren't always so terrifying. Sometimes they seem almost helpful, like a hand reaching out from some other reality to give you a nudge. This next story, from a user named Sarah, is one of the most famous and baffling accounts of a glitch that appears to have saved a life. For months, when she was about 20, Sarah kept having recurring dreams about a woman she'd never met. The woman had long dark hair and a very distinct face. In these dreams, Sarah just knew her name was Aurora. The dreams were so persistent and confusing that she even tried to Google the name, searching for any connection to this mystery woman. But she found nothing. After a few months, the dreams faded, and she wrote it off as a weird quirk of her subconscious. Years later, on Halloween night in 2009, Sarah was in a car with a friend. They were stopped at a gas station, about to pull out onto a busy highway. Just as she was about to hit the gas, her phone rang. It was a random, unknown number. She paused to answer, but the line was dead silent. The driver behind her got impatient, laid on the horn, and then recklessly swerved around her to get onto the highway first. Seconds later, a silver Civic lost control and crashed directly into the car that had just pulled out in front of her. Both drivers were killed instantly, a fate that would have been hers, if not for that phantom phone call. Hours later, still shaken but incredibly grateful, her curiosity took over. She called the mysterious number back. It rang 3 times and went to voicemail. A recorded voice said, "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number." The goosebumps were immediate. The next day, she tried again, and this time a woman answered. Sarah explained everything, the accident, the phone call, and even the dreams from years ago. The woman on the other end was baffled. She had no idea how Sarah got her number and swore she had never called her. To make things even weirder, Sarah asked if she had a Facebook profile. She did. When Sarah looked her up, she saw the exact same face from her dreams. It was her. Aurora was real. But she had never called Sarah, and they had absolutely no connection to each other. So what happened? A coincidence of cosmic proportions? Or was it a glitch in the system, a guardian angel from another timeline reaching across the void to save a life? Stories like these really make you wonder about the rules of the world we think we know. If you're finding these accounts as fascinating and chilling as we are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're always exploring the deepest mysteries of the internet, and you won't want to miss what we find next. Now, let's get back to the glitches. The idea of a doppelganger, an exact double of yourself, is an ancient and pretty terrifying concept. Seeing one has historically been seen as an omen of bad luck or even death. But today, these sightings are often reported as glitches, moments where reality seems to have hit copy and paste. One user shared a story that feels like a doppelganger encounter and a time slip all rolled into one. His story starts when he was about 9 or 10 years old. He was in a pub's car park in England with his parents. While he was waiting, he looked up at a house that overlooked the parking lot and saw a teenager standing in the window. The person waved at him, and the boy felt this strange, unexplainable feeling of recognition, like he already knew them. So, he waved back. When his parents asked who he was waving at, he just said it was some person in the window. The moment passed, and he forgot all about it for years. Fast forward a decade. The user, now a young man, was visiting his nan at her new house. As it turns out, it was the very same house that overlooked that pub car park. He walked into his nan's room, a room he was never usually allowed to go into, and was drawn to the window. As he looked out, the memory flooded back to him. He realized he was now on the other side of that bizarre interaction from his childhood. And right on cue, he saw a young boy, about 9 or 10, in the car park down below. The boy looked up at him and waved. He felt that same strange sense of familiarity, and without thinking, waved back. He was now the person in the window. He had just experienced both sides of the same bizarre, 10-year-long time loop. It seems like breaking his nan's rule about her room was the final piece that closed the circle. How do you even begin to explain a perfectly mirrored event separated by a decade? Was it just a weird case of déjà vu and false memory? Or did he truly see a ripple in time, witnessing his past and future selves through a temporary crack in the matrix? From a life lived in the span of a few minutes, to an impossible phone call from a guardian angel, to meeting yourself across a decade, these stories mess with our perception of a stable, linear reality. They're sent in by people from all over the world who are convinced they saw something that shouldn't be possible. They remind us that for all our scientific progress, there are still mysteries hiding just beneath the surface of our daily lives. Maybe our reality isn't as solid as we think. Maybe we really are living inside some grand, complex simulation, and every now and then, we get to see a glitch. What's the most unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? Have you ever had a moment that felt like a true glitch in the matrix? Share your own stories down in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching. The last night I took the night shift at Bramble & Sons Distribution because it paid double what I was making at the diner. Easy work too. Sit in the booth at the warehouse gates. Check the occasional truck in or out, log it in the book, and mostly just tried to stay awake. The manager told me, just make sure the lights stay on. I thought it was a weird thing to say. It was a warehouse 500,000 square feet of steel shelves and concrete floors. Of course, the lights would stay on. The first week was uneventful. The trucks stopped by 1 in the morning, leaving the place silent except for the buzzing hum of fluorescent lights. But around night 8, something changed. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, I noticed a light flicker deep inside the warehouse. A single fluorescent tube sputtering high up near the rafters. I wouldn't have paid it any mind light's flicker, but when I looked again, the flicker was moving. The dark patch wasn't fixed in one spot. It slid slowly down the aisle, like a shadow stretching, swallowing one fixture after another. I thought it was a trick of the eyes, but the lights above that aisle went out completely. Just gone. The rest of the warehouse buzzed as normal, but that aisle was now a black corridor. I radioed it in. Static. No one answered. I decided to check it myself. Rule number 1 in security. Don't wander into the dark by yourself. But the silence pressing at me was unbearable. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped inside. The warehouse air was colder than outside. The beam of my light carved thin lines in the darkness. I walked down the center aisle, rows of pallets stacked with boxed goods looming on either side. That's when I noticed something that made me stop. The shelves weren't full anymore. The boxes I'd seen earlier on my rounds were gone, the steel racks bare. I checked the logbook in my pocket. No trucks had been through, no shipments. But the further I walked, the emptier the shelves became. And then, as I reached the middle of the dark aisle, I heard it. A sharp, wet drip, drip, echoing in the shadows. I swung the flashlight to the floor. The concrete was damp. A thin line of black liquid trickled from under the pallets, gleaming in my beam. I leaned closer. It wasn't oil. It smelled coppery, metallic. Blood. My chest tightened, and that's when I heard the sound of movement-slow footsteps echoing from the far end of the aisle. The beam of my flashlight caught something between the shelves. A figure. Tall, hunched, wrapped in the shadows like they clung to him. His face was hidden, but I saw his hands, long, pale fingers, wet with the same black liquid dripping onto the floor. He didn't walk so much as sway forward, like a puppet pulled on invisible strings. I froze. The air caught in my lungs until my flashlight sputtered. The batteries died, plunging me into a choking darkness. The humming of the warehouse lights cut out. For the first time, I understood what the manager had meant. Make sure the lights stay on. I bolted down the aisle, blind, slamming into shelves, skin tearing on jagged steel. My only goal was to get back to the security booth, to the glow of the desk lamp I'd left burning. As I ran, I felt it behind me. The air shifted, pressure tightening against my ears. The footsteps were no longer slow. They were fast, inhumanly fast, closing the distance. I didn't dare look back. When I finally burst through the doors into the booth, the lamp was still shining, casting a fragile glow across the logbook. I slammed the door shut and locked it, chest heaving. The lights across the warehouse buzzed back to life, every single fixture snapping on at once. The aisles were bright, spotless, lined with pallets and boxes just as they'd always been. Empty, quiet, normal. Had I imagined it? But then I noticed the logbook on the desk. A fresh entry had been scrawled into the margin, not in my handwriting. 3 words, written in something that smeared and flaked like dried blood. Keep the lights. I quit that night. Never went back. But here's the part that eats at me. 2 weeks later, while scanning the local news, I saw a small story buried in the paper. 3 night shift workers missing from Bramble & Sons distribution. Booth found empty. Lights off. Investigation ongoing. No trace of them. Not a single sign. And sometimes When I wake up at night, my lamp flickering, I swear I hear it again, slow footsteps in the hall, getting closer each time the bulb fades. Scary stories. For sleep, you shouldn't watch alone. You know, there's a certain comfort in old things, isn't there? A warmth in the hum of a vintage amp, the gentle crackle of vinyl. At least, that's what I told myself when I brought the antique radio home. It was a beautiful thing, all polished cherry wood, and brass dials that turned with a heavy, satisfying click. But I found out pretty quickly that it had a secret. At night, after the world had gone quiet, it only played one station, a station that hadn't broadcast in 50 years. The stories were chilling, perfect for a lonely night. But the real horror wasn't about the ghosts and the tailies. It started when I began to recognize the names of the dead. At first, I thought it was just a cool novelty, my own private little portal to the past. Every night, just after midnight, the static would die down and a voice, smooth as velvet, would welcome listeners to the midnight hour on KYRY radio. He sounded like one of those old-time announcers you just don't hear anymore, with perfect diction and a calm, almost mesmerizing cadence. His sign-off never changed. Until tomorrow, may your dreams be peaceful and your shadows remain silent. The stories he told were these quaint little horror plays. Ghostly run-ins on lonely roads, haunted family heirlooms, strange things in the woods. They were a bit formulaic, predictable even, but his delivery just pulled you in. The crackle of the broadcast, the faint, tinny music playing between the segments, it was the perfect atmosphere to drift off to. For a few weeks, that was my ritual. I'd climb into bed, turn the dial, and let the stories from another time lull me into that state of relaxed unease. The kind of pleasant fear you can only feel when you know you're perfectly safe. These were just stories after all. History. The people in them were long gone. Or so I thought. Then things started to change. It was subtle. The stories just got darker. The announcer's calm voice, the one I'd found so comforting, started to feel detached, indifferent. The tailies were less about spooky ghosts and more about grim human tragedies. One night, he started a story about an old man in a quiet suburban house. He described the man's collection of shit bottles, his little dog, and the loose runner on his basement stairs. The story ended abruptly with the announcer describing a tragic accident, a fatal fall in the night. Then he said the name, Arthur Pendleton. I sat bolt upright in bed, feeling the blood drain from my face. Arthur Pendleton was my neighbor. He lived 2 houses down. He had died just last week. His daughter told my mom he'd fallen down the stairs in the middle of the night. It had to be a coincidence. A sick, unbelievable coincidence. Pendleton isn't that uncommon of a name. Lots of old men have dogs and fall downstairs. I tried to reason with myself, to rationalize the cold knot of dread twisting in my gut. I told myself I was just tired, that the late-night stories were getting to me. I shut off the radio and tried to sleep, but the announcer's voice just echoed in the silence. I couldn't bring myself to turn on the radio for the next 2 nights. The silence in my room felt louder, more threatening than any story it could have told. But the curiosity, that need to know, it was an itch I just couldn't scratch. On the 3rd night, I gave in. I turned the dial, my hand shaking a little. The announcer was already in the middle of a story. Double quotes ... the old county road is a treacherous place after dark, he was saying, his voice a low hum. He described a young woman driving home too fast, a deer that leaped out of the darkness, the awful screech of tires. He spoke her name, Jessica Miller. My heart stopped. Jessica was my coworker's niece. She died in a car crash on Old Route 6 just 3 days ago. An announcer from 50 years ago was describing her death like it just happened. I scrambled for my laptop and searched for everything KYRY radio. The midnight hour, anything about the announcer. There was nothing. Not a single record of the station. No archives of its shows. It was a ghost. A ghost station reporting on the deaths of people I knew, days after they happened, from half a century in the past. Cold, sharp panic started to set in. This wasn't a radio. It was something else. A receiver, tuned to some echo in time, broadcasting obituaries as they were happening. So, here I am tonight, just staring at it. The polished wood seems to be swallowing the light in the room, making everything darker. I have to know. I have to hear what it says next. The fear is a physical weight on my chest, but the compulsion to listen is stronger. The clock ticks past midnight. The static hisses, and then, right on schedule, it clears. The announcer's voice fills the room, as calm and steady as ever. "Good evening, and welcome back to the midnight hour," he says. "We have one final story for you tonight. A sad, lonely tale from our very own city." He pauses. In that quiet, I can hear my own heart pounding. It concerns a young man, a collector of forgotten things. A quiet man who lived alone, who found a certain comfort in the hum of old electronics. He's describing me. He's describing my apartment, the worn armchair I'm sitting in right now, the slight tremble in my hands. The air in the room turns ice cold. I can't breathe. I want to smash the radio, throw it out the window, but I can't move. I'm frozen, a prisoner to that voice. This isn't just a broadcast anymore. It feels like a judgment. His voice drops to a near whisper, a tone of fake pity that chills me to the bone. A tragic story indeed, for a man who loved the past so much he was about to become a part of it. He clears his throat. His name. The stories we hear in the dark can come from anywhere, and some of them we're forced to believe. For more tales that watch you from the shadows, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You wouldn't want to miss what's coming. Unexplainable true horror stories from night owls. You know that quiet that settles in after midnight? It's a different kind of stillness, isn't it? It can be peaceful, or it can be deeply unsettling. For night owls like us, awake while the rest of the world is asleep, that line between what's real and what can get a little blurry. The normal sounds of a house settling can start to sound like footsteps down the hall. A shadow in the corner of your eye looks a little too much like a figure, just watching. Tonight, we're diving into the chilling accounts of other people who stay up late. These are the true stories of voices in empty houses, shadowy figures that hang around at the edge of your vision, and terrifying encounters that only seem to crawl out after the sun goes down. So, dim the lights. Get comfortable. These are the unexplainable horror stories from the people who know the night best. Story 1. The Night Clerk in the Empty Room. Our first story comes from a guy named Marco. To pay his way through college, he took a graveyard shift job at an old, kind of rundown hotel. It was a relic from the 70s, with long, dim hallways and carpets that had seen better days. Most nights were incredibly boring. Marco would just read textbooks, watch movies, and deal with the rare late check-in. The silence was his only real coworker. But the third floor was different. Specifically, room 313. That room had been out of service for as long as anyone could remember. The door was always locked, and the system showed it as permanently offline. Marco was told it was because of some bad water damage the owners never got around to fixing. One night, around 2:30 in the morning, the silence was shattered by the front desk phone. Marco looked at the console, and his stomach just tightened. The call was coming from inside the hotel, from room 313. He hesitated for a second, then answered. "Front desk, this is Marco." On the other end, nothing but harsh, crackling static like a dead radio station. He was about to hang up, assuming it was a glitch, when a faint sound cut through the noise. It was a whisper. Too quiet to make out any words, but it was definitely a voice. Then the line went dead. He tried to write it off as a problem with the ancient phone system. But an hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was a guest in room 213, the room directly underneath the sealed-off one. The man sounded pissed. "Listen," he said, "I don't know who's in the room above me, but you need to tell them to cut it out. It sounds like they're dragging heavy furniture across the floor, and I think I can hear someone crying." Marco's blood went cold. He promised the guest he'd handle it, knowing full well he was the only employee on site. There was nobody on the third floor. Now, protocol says he has to go check out noise complaints. But every single instinct in his body was screaming at him to stay right where he was. Still, he grabbed the master key and got in the elevator, his heart pounding against his ribs. The third floor hallway was even creepier than usual. It was dead silent. He walked toward room 313, his steps swallowed by the old carpet. As he got closer, he could see the door was shut tight, with a thin layer of dust on the knob. He just stood there, listening, but the dragging and crying had stopped. There was nothing. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, feeling a little foolish. It had to be the pipes or the old building groaning. He was just about to turn and leave when a voice came from right behind the door. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was crystal clear, like someone had their mouth pressed right up against the wood. And all it said was his name, Marco. He didn't stick around to hear anything else. He bolted. He ran straight back to the lobby, locked himself in the manager's office, and stayed there until the sun came up. He quit that morning. As he was leaving, the day manager just looked at him, shook his head, and said, "So you heard it too, huh?" He explained the room wasn't sealed off because of water damage. It was sealed after a guest had taken her own life in there years ago. Apparently, almost every night clerk who worked there long enough had gotten a weird call or a noise complaint from the room below, and nobody ever stayed long after that. Story 2. The Scent of Old Smoke. This next story is from a graphic designer named Claire. She thought she'd found the perfect apartment. It was the top floor of a gorgeous, converted Victorian house. You know the type, with high ceilings, original floors, and a ton of old-world charm. As a freelancer who kept weird hours, she loved the idea of working late into the night, surrounded by all that history. The first few weeks were perfect. She got into her routine, often working at her desk until 2 or 3 in the morning, soaking in the deep, peaceful silence of the neighborhood. Then, she started to notice the smell. It was the sharp, unmistakable scent of cigar smoke. It was always faint and only ever showed up after midnight, which was weird because the building had a strict no-smoking policy. She just figured it was drifting in from outside somehow, even with her windows sealed shut against the winter cold. Soon, other little things started happening. She'd be focused on her work and hear a single heavy footstep creak on the hardwood floor in the hall. When she'd get up to look, of course, no one was there. Other times, she'd be hit with this overwhelming feeling of being watched, a real, tangible pressure in the room that made the hair on her arms stand up. She'd scan the dark corners of her apartment, but she was always alone. She tried to explain it all away, of course. The house was old and probably drafty, carrying smells from other apartments. The floors were ancient. They were going to creak. And the feeling of being watched? That was just paranoia from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. One night, she was grinding to finish a project on a tight deadline. The world outside was pitch black and silent. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the cigar smell came back, but this time, it wasn't faint at all. It was thick and nasty, like someone had just lit up right beside her. Her eyes started to water. Annoyed and a little spooked, she looked up from her computer, ready to go see if she could spot someone smoking outside her window. That's when she froze. Over in the far corner of the room, standing just inside the shadows cast by her desk lamp, was a figure. It was the tall, broad silhouette of a man. She couldn't see a face or clothes, it was just a void. A shape of pure darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. It stood perfectly still, but she could feel its presence. A heavy, suffocating energy aimed right at her. She was slammed with a fear so intense, it felt like a physical weight on her chest. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She just stared at the shadow figure, her heart hammering. The standoff felt like it lasted forever. Then, as the first faint hint of dawn started to break, the figure just dissolved, fading back into the shadows until it was gone. The smell of smoke disappeared with it. The next day, she did some digging and found an old newspaper article from the 1920s about a fire in that very house. A rich, reclusive businessman who owned the property had died from smoke inhalation in his top-floor study apartment. He was famous for being a heavy cigar smoker. Claire broke her lease and moved out the next week. In her new apartment, she makes a point to never work late. If you're the kind of person who wonders what's really lurking in the dark, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've always got more stories for those who are brave enough to listen. Story 3. The Scratching from the Attic. Our last story tonight was sent in by a guy named David, and it's about something that happened to his family when he was a teenager. David was a total night owl. He'd stay up playing video games with his headphones on, totally lost in his own world. His bedroom was on the second floor, and the hatch to the attic was right in his ceiling. It all started with a sound, a faint, scratching noise coming from the attic, right above his head. For the first few nights, he brushed it off as a mouse or a squirrel. He told his parents, and they agreed, setting a few traps. But the traps were always empty. But then, the sound started to change. It felt less like a scurrying animal and more intentional. It was rhythmic, asterisk scrape, scrape, scrape dot asterisk. It always started after midnight, and it always stopped the second he pulled his headphones off to get a better listen. Then came the whispers. He'd be in the middle of a game, not in a voice chat, and a faint, distorted voice would whisper right into his headset. It was never a clear word, just a hissing, breathy sound that had no business being there. He started seeing things, two quick movements in his peripheral vision, dark shapes that vanished when he turned to look. He was getting paranoid and barely sleeping. One night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, the scratching started again, but this time it was frantic and loud, directly over his bed. It sounded like something was desperately trying to claw through the drywall. David ripped his headphones off, frozen in fear. The moment he did, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even worse. Then, the attic hatch started to shake. It was a heavy piece of wood, secured on the outside with a thick sliding metal bolt. He watched, completely horrified, as the heavy metal bolt started to vibrate. It rattled in its casing, and then, slowly, impossibly, it began to slide open, all by itself. With a loud click, the bolt slid all the way free. The attic hatch groaned open, swinging down on its hinges. It revealed nothing but a square of pure pitch-black darkness. The air in the room went ice cold. David couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He just stared up into that void. And then, from the deepest part of that darkness, two pale, glowing dots blinked open. They were eyes, and they were staring right at him. That's what finally broke his paralysis. He let out a raw scream, scrambling off his bed and falling to the floor. His parents burst in and flipped on the light. The instant the room was flooded with light, the attic hatch slammed shut with a deafening bang. His dad, seeing the absolute terror on his face, looked up. The bolt was slid securely back in place. They never found out what was in the attic. They had the house blessed, and a paranormal team they brought in confirmed high EMF readings and what they called a heavy, non-human presence that was concentrated in the attic. The family sold the house within 6 months. David says he still has nightmares about that night, can't sleep in a room with an attic hatch, and will never, ever forget the sight of those two glowing eyes opening in the dark. It seems the night isn't always for sleeping. For some, it's a time when the veil between worlds gets thin, and the things that hide from the daylight feel bold enough to step out. These are the moments that have no easy explanation, leaving behind only a cold fear and the chilling certainty that we aren't always as alone as we think we are. Thanks for joining me for these stories from the dead of night. If you have your own unexplainable encounter that happened while the world was asleep, I'd love to hear about it in the comments or through the submission email in the description. If you want more true, terrifying tales, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Until then, try to get some sleep. True Reddit horror from the night shift. When the sun goes down, the world gets quiet. But for some people, that silence is the most terrifying part. It's in that quiet you start to hear things that shouldn't be there. A whisper in a room you know is empty. Footsteps in a locked building. A reflection in the glass when you're supposed to be alone. These aren't just campfire tales. They're the chilling realities of working the night shift. While the rest of us are asleep, a hidden workforce keeps the world turning. They're the nurses, the gas station clerks, the 911 dispatchers, the lonely sentinels of the night. Their shifts are usually marked by a deep, profound quiet, an unnerving stillness that can easily play tricks on a tired mind. But what happens when the silence is broken by something that can't be explained? The stories you're about to hear come from those who have stood watch in the darkest hours. They were shared on Reddit by people who just needed to tell someone what they saw. These are true horror stories from the night shift. Story 1. The Man in Room 3B. Our first story comes from a nurse on the geriatric ward of an old hospital. You know the kind of place a building that's soaked up more than its share of suffering and loss over the decades. Most nights were routine, just checking on patients and filling out charts. But that all changed because of a patient in room 3B. He was a frail, elderly man, often confused, but he'd never been any trouble. Until he started to scream. It always happened around 2 in the morning. The nurse would be at her station when a blood-curdling shriek would rip through the hallway. The first few times, she ran in, expecting a medical emergency. But she'd find him huddled in the corner of his bed, pointing a trembling finger at an empty chair, his eyes wide with pure terror. He'd just repeat the same thing, over and over. Get him out. Get the man out of my room. At first, the staff just figured it was dementia. Nighttime confusion is common enough. They'd soothe him, tell him he was safe, that nobody was there. But the screaming fits got more frequent, more intense. The patient started begging them not to leave him alone in the room. He described the man in chilling detail, tall and thin, with a cruel smile. He said the man would just sit in that chair and watch him, and that the air would turn ice cold right before he appeared. Then one night, the nurse felt it for herself. As she got close to room 3B, a wave of cold washed over her. So sudden and so biting, it felt like walking into a freezer. At that exact moment, the lights in the hallway right above his door began to flicker violently. She froze, a knot of dread tightening in her gut. She pushed the door open and saw the patient cowering again. But this time, he wasn't screaming. He was whimpering, his eyes glued to the chair. The room was freezing, way colder than the hallway. She looked at the chair. It was empty. But as she stood there, the call light on his bedside table started blinking on and off, slowly, deliberately. No one was touching it. That was the turning point. The staff started to believe him. His terror was just too real, and now they were experiencing strange things too. Soon, other patients on the hall started complaining about a shadowy figure walking into their rooms at night. Utterly desperate, the hospital staff did something they never thought they'd do. They called a local priest to perform a blessing on room 3B. The patient was moved to a different room, and he never screamed about the man again. But to this day, no one on the staff will go into room 3B alone after midnight. They say you can still feel that cold spot right by the chair. And sometimes, in the dead of night, the call light just blinks on, waiting. A haunted hospital ward is one thing, but our next story takes us to the desolate quiet of a roadside gas station, proving that sometimes the real monsters aren't ghosts, but the people who wander in from the dark. Story 2, The Crying Man. This story was shared by a young guy working his very first night shift at a 24-hour gas station on a remote highway. For the first few hours, it was just as boring as he expected, with the occasional trucker stopping for coffee. The store was just a small, brightly lit box surrounded by miles of dark, empty road. Then, around 3 in the morning, a beat-up sedan pulled up to the pumps, but parked far from the store's entrance. It just sat there, engine off, lights out. He watched it on the security monitor for a few minutes, feeling that first prickle of unease. It was the time of night when you expect people to fill up and get out, fast. After 10 minutes, he saw movement. The driver's side door opened, and a man got out, and he was sobbing, not just crying. These were heaving, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. He stumbled to the front of his car and just stood there, weeping uncontrollably in the passing headlights of a truck. The clerk, completely unnerved, kept his hand near the phone, trying to decide if he should call the cops. But then he saw someone else in the car. In the passenger seat sat a woman, perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Her face was a blank mask, completely emotionless. She didn't look at the crying man, didn't react at all. She just stared forward as if he didn't even exist. The man cried for what felt like an eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he stopped. He wiped his eyes on his sleeve. His whole body went rigid, and he got back in the car. The clerk watched, heart pounding, as the man started the engine. For a full minute, the car just idled. The man and woman sat in absolute silence, side by side, bathed in the dashboard's faint glow. The clerk felt this profound sense of wrongness, a chill that had nothing to do with ghosts. It was the total disconnect, the man's raw, explosive grief, and the woman's absolute, terrifying emptiness. Finally, the car pulled away, vanishing back into the darkness without ever buying gas. The clerk was left alone in his bright, silent store. The image of that emotionless woman burned into his mind. He never saw them again, but he said for the rest of his time working there, every time a car pulled up late, he'd feel a jolt of fear, wondering if the crying man and the silent woman had come back. Sometimes, the horror of the night shift isn't about what you see, but what you can hear. Our final story comes from a place where every sound is a potential crisis, a 911 dispatch center. Story 3. The call from the vacant house. A veteran 911 operator shared this one, an experience that still haunts her years later. The night was pretty normal, just a steady stream of calls. Then, a call came through on the emergency line. When she answered, all she heard was white noise, and faintly in the background, what sounded like screaming. It was distant and distorted, but it was unmistakably a scream of pure terror. She did her job. 911. What is your emergency? No response. The screaming just continued, rising and falling. Her system traced the call to an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She dispatched a police unit for a possible assault or domestic disturbance. While waiting for officers to arrive, she had to stay on the line, listening to those chilling sounds. After a few minutes, the line went dead. The police arrived at the house and reported back. The place was vacant, and not just empty, it was completely boarded up. It had been abandoned for years. The windows were covered in plywood, the yard was a mess, and there were no signs of anyone breaking in. The officers checked the perimeter and found nothing. No one was there. They cleared the call as unfounded, probably a glitch or a pocket dial. The operator tried to shake it off, but an hour later, it happened again. Another 911 call from the exact same address. The same distorted white noise, the same faint screaming. Again, she dispatched the police. And again, they found the house secured and empty. This time, the officers were spooked. They confirmed the house had no power running to it, so there was no way a phone inside could be making calls. This continued for her entire shift. Every hour, like clockwork, a call would come from the vacant house. And each time, the operator had to listen to those faint, terrifying screams while sending officers to a place they all knew was empty. By the third call, her hands were shaking. She felt this creeping psychological dread. Was someone murdered in that house long ago? Was this some kind of residual haunting, an echo of pain trapped in the phone lines? The calls only stopped when the sun came up and her shift ended. She said she never took another night shift again, terrified she'd have to answer another call from the silent, screaming house. Isolation, darkness, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. These are the things that tie these experiences together. Whether it's a spirit in a hospital, a chilling encounter at a lonely gas station, or a phantom call from an empty house, the night shift holds its own unique brand of fear. It's a stark reminder that when the world goes to sleep, not everything is at rest. So, what do you think? Were these paranormal events, or just the tricks of a tired mind? We really want to hear from you. If you have your own chilling night shift story, share it in the comments below. And if you want more true, terrifying tales, make sure you like this video and subscribe. The next time you're awake in the middle of the night, listen. Just listen closely to the silence. You never know what you might hear. I worked the graveyard shift, and what I saw still haunts me. You hear people say the graveyard shift is peaceful, a quiet time to think. They couldn't be more wrong. What I saw in those dead-of-night hours wasn't peaceful. It was wrong, a total violation of how things are supposed to be, and the screams I can still hear them echoing in my head, long after I clocked out for good. This isn't just some scary story. It's a memory that's burned into me, a constant reminder that some places are wide awake when the rest of the world is fast asleep. It all started the way it usually does. I needed the money, and the night shift paid better. The gig was a security guard at the old Sentinel building downtown. By day, it was a 20-story hive of activity, but at night, it became my own private kingdom of echoes and shadows. The job was simple enough: walk the floors, check that the doors are locked, and keep an eye on the security monitors. For the first few weeks, it was perfect. The building would settle, and the only sounds were the low hum of the HVAC and my own footsteps on the marble floors. Of course, a building that old has stories. The day shift guys loved to trade them. They'd say it was built on an old asylum, or whisper about some executive who jumped from the 15th floor back in the 80s. I blew it all off as office gossip, just spooky stories to break up the 9-to-5 grind. I'm a practical guy. I believe in what I can see and touch, and for a while, the Sentinel building gave me no reason to think any differently. The shift was gradual, so gradual, I almost didn't notice. It started with the elevators. I'd be at my desk on the ground floor, just watching the monitors, and I'd see one of the cars start to move. It would creep up to a random floor, maybe the 9th. The doors would slide open to a totally empty hallway, pause, and then close. No one called it. No one was there. My first thought? Faulty wiring. A ghost in the machine, you know? Then came the noises. A faint whisper that seemed to hiss right out of my radio, but when I'd check, it was just static. Sometimes, on my rounds, I'd hear what sounded like a second set of footsteps, keeping perfect pace with mine, but on the floor right above me. If I stopped, they stopped. If I started walking, they'd start again. I tried to switch up my patrol route to catch whoever was messing with me, but I never found a soul. I told myself it was just the weird acoustics of a huge, empty building. My sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched, it was harder to explain away. It was worst in the sublevel, a huge damp basement they used for storage. Down there, surrounded by dusty file cabinets and old office furniture covered in white sheets, the air was just heavy. I'd get that prickle on the back of my neck, that gut feeling that says you are not alone. I'd whip around, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, but there was never anything there. Just the shapes of old desks and chairs, like a silent, waiting crowd. The moment my rational mind finally gave up happened on a Tuesday. It was around 3 in the morning, that point in the night where the whole city outside is dead quiet. I was on the 17th floor, a level that had been vacant for years. The air up there was stale, and the silence was so thick you could feel it. As I was about to round a corner, I heard a faint, mournful cry. It was so soft, I almost dismissed it as wind, but it sounded so human, like a woman weeping. I froze, every part of me on high alert. "This is security," I called out. "Is anyone there?" Nothing, just silence. I moved toward the corner office where the sound had come from, my hand tight on my flashlight. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. That was red flag number 1, because I always checked the doors. I pushed it open, and my flashlight beam cut into an empty room. Dust danced in the light. There was just a bare desk, and a single office chair pointed toward the big window overlooking the city. I scanned every inch of the room. I was just about to leave when I heard it again, much clearer this time. A single heartbreaking sob, and it was right next to me. I stumbled back into the hall, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't run. I just stood there, paralyzed, listening. The deep silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on that dark doorway, and I didn't stop moving until the elevator doors closed, and I was safe on the ground floor. I spent the rest of my shift staring at the monitors, my eyes constantly jumping to the camera for the 17th floor. It stayed empty all night. For about a week after that, things were quiet. I really tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it was just stress and exhaustion. But I couldn't make myself go back to the 17th floor. I'd just mark it clear on my log from the stairwell door. I felt like a coward, but the fear was a physical thing now. A cold rock in my stomach that wouldn't leave. I started to feel like I was in a game with something, like an unseen presence was testing me, pushing me closer and closer to the edge. It wouldn't have to wait much longer. The final night was the one that broke me. A storm was rolling in, and the building felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I was doing my last patrol of the upper floors, moving fast, practically jogging. I just wanted the night to be over. As I passed the elevators on the 12th floor, one of them chimed, and the doors slid open. I hadn't called it. The car was empty. I just stood there, staring into it. Against all my better instincts, a dark curiosity took over. It felt like a deliberate, personal invitation. That's when I saw it. Not in the elevator, but at the far end of the long hallway, half hidden in the shadows. It was the figure of a man, tall, thin, and wearing an old, dated-looking suit. He was just standing there, completely still, with his head slightly bowed. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. The pure wrongness of him being there just sucked the air out of the hallway. "Hello?" I managed to get out, my voice shaking. "The building is closed." The figure didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, a silent statue in the dark. I took one shaky step forward, lifting my flashlight. As the beam hit the figure, its form seemed to flicker, like a bad TV signal. It was there, but it wasn't solid. I could almost see the wall right through it. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't some trespasser. And then the screaming started. It was nothing like the weeping I'd heard before. This was a raw, primal howl of pure agony. It wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, my own feet. It was a disembodied shriek that vibrated through my bones, so loud and so full of pain that I slapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound was inside my head. As the scream hit its peak, the figure at the end of the hall lifted its head. There was still no face, just a dark, blurry smear where a face should be. Then, just as suddenly as it all started, the scream cut off, and the figure dissolved into nothing. I didn't need another invitation. I turned and ran. I forgot about procedures, about locking up, about finishing my shift. I bolted for the emergency stairs and didn't stop until I crashed through the ground floor exit and out into the rainy night. I never went back. I called my boss the next morning and quit. I didn't even try to explain what could I say that wouldn't get me a one-way ticket to a psych evaluation. After I quit, I did some digging online, just looking through old city archives. I found a story that made the day shift guy's corporate folklore feel a lot less like folklore. Back in 1982, an accountant who worked on the 12th floor was caught in a huge embezzlement scheme. Facing total ruin, he stayed late one night. They found his body the next morning. He had taken his own life in a small supply closet at the end of the hall. I've never worked another night shift. I can't. The quiet of the night isn't comforting anymore. It just feels like a blank canvas, waiting for things that shouldn't exist to come out and play. Some nights, when the house is still and I'm in that weird space between being awake and being asleep, I can still hear it. That awful, soul-tearing scream. It's a permanent echo in the quietest parts of my mind. A reminder that when you work the graveyard shift, you're never really alone. What about you? Have you ever worked the graveyard shift and seen something you just can't explain? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd genuinely like to know. I'm not the only one out there. And if you want to hear more tales from the dark side of the clock, be sure to like and subscribe. Stay safe. Most disturbing security footage that science can't explain security cameras are everywhere. They're meant to catch thieves and keep us honest. But every now and then, they capture something that just doesn't add up. Something that logic can't easily explain away. From shadowy figures in historic buildings to strange creatures caught in a driveway, this is the kind of footage that sparks endless debate. Today, we're looking at 4 of the most chilling and controversial clips ever to hit the internet. Kicking things off, we head to the wooded hills of Moorhead, Kentucky. In July of 2022, a home security camera recorded a clip that quickly went viral. The video shows a pale, thin, human-like figure moving with a strange, cautious walk. It creeps toward a parked car, hunched over, before stopping to look around, its movements just off. The video, posted by Paranormality magazine, blew up online, sparking a huge debate. The figure is stark white, almost glowing in the camera's night vision. Its limbs seem long, and its gait is unnervingly unnatural. You can even hear someone in the original video say, "You can see his face clearly." So what was it? Theories ran wild. Some pointed to local Appalachian folklore, suggesting it was a cryptid, a creature of legend, like Bigfoot or the Mothman. Others thought its proportions looked more alien, like the classic gray archetype caught on a late-night stroll. Of course, there are more down-to-earth explanations. The most popular theory is that it was just a person in a white morph suit pulling a prank. Skeptics noted the shaky camera work, suggesting someone was filming a screen, which makes manipulation easier. Others argued that infrared cameras can make dark clothing appear white. Adding to the skepticism, the original owners of the footage reportedly declined to be interviewed unless they were paid. So, was it a cleverly designed hoax? Or did a camera in a quiet Kentucky town accidentally record something truly unknown? The footage is just blurry enough to keep people guessing, and just clear enough to be creepy. Next, we're off to London, to a place drowning in history and tragedy, Hampton Court Palace. This former home of King Henry VIII has ghost stories baked into its walls. But in the winter of 2003, security cameras caught something that gave those old legends a modern twist. The story goes that for 3 days in a row, a heavy set of fire doors in an exhibition area kept flying open with incredible force. Security staff were baffled. On the first day, the CCTV footage showed the doors bursting open, but nothing was there. The next day, it happened again. But this time, the camera caught a tall, gaunt figure in what looked like period clothing emerging from the doorway. The figure, nicknamed Skeletor by the media, calmly closed the doors and vanished. On the third day, the doors flew open again, but the mysterious doorkeeper was gone. The footage became an international sensation. So what was the deal? The leading skeptical theory is that it was a historical reenactor. The palace employs actors in period costumes, and it's plausible one of them, maybe annoyed by a draft, simply shut the doors, not knowing a camera was rolling. But that doesn't quite explain the force that threw the doors open in the first place, which some have attributed to environmental or mechanical quirks. The palace itself has never officially debunked the footage, presenting it as a genuine mystery. Was it the ghost of Henry VIII, or another of the palace's many reported spirits? Or was it just an actor in the right place at the wrong time? It's one thing to hear ghost stories. It's another to see a silent figure appear on a modern camera, perform an action, and fade back into history. Before we get to our top 2, if you're enjoying these mysteries, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. Now we're back in the US, in the small city of La Junta, Colorado, for a clip that's as weird as it is short. In June 2019, homeowner Vivian Gomez checked her security camera and found something so bizarre it became a global phenomenon. The video shows a small, stick-thin figure with what looks like large, floppy ears and an odd, jerky walk. It does a weird, chicken-like strut down the driveway and then disappears. The internet immediately compared it to Dobby, the house elf from Harry Potter, and the name stuck. Vivian Gomez swore the footage was real and unaltered. The internet, predictably, exploded with theories. Was it an alien? A prank? Or Dobby himself, on vacation in Colorado? The most common skeptical take is that the figure is actually Gomez's young son. The theory suggests the boy was just playing outside, maybe with underwear on his head, creating the floppy ears illusion. Inside Edition even had the boy, Bobby, try to recreate the dance with underwear on his head. While there were some similarities, both he and his mom insisted he was inside at the time. A forensic video analyst who reviewed the clip for Inside Edition said there was no evidence of digital tampering. He did, however, state that the most likely explanation was something normal being distorted by the infrared camera, though he admitted the resemblance to Dobby was uncanny. It's a classic case of a few seconds of grainy footage, creating a mystery that's more fun to believe than to solve. Our number 1 spot goes to a video that has become a legend of internet horror. The story is set on September 14th, 2003, at a Wingate hotel in Illinois, but it didn't go viral until years later. It all started with guests complaining about terrifying screams coming from an empty room 209. Security footage shows a guard, identified as John, going to investigate. As he approaches, you can faintly hear the screams on the recording. He unlocks the door and steps inside. What happens next is what made this clip famous. Just as John enters, a faint, human-shaped mist is seen exiting the room and drifting down the hall. On the audio, you hear John radio his manager in a panic, describing a scene of chaos. The carpet is ripped up. Furniture is overturned. and the shower is running, all in a supposedly empty room. However, the authenticity of this video is highly questionable. The original YouTube uploader, Jiminit22, claimed they couldn't name the specific hotel for legal reasons, a classic red flag for a hoax. Further investigation has revealed that the creator of the video is likely a filmmaker named Turer Clay, and the clip was a promotional film or short horror project. In the credits of one of his films, The Blackwell Ghost, he gives a special thanks to John and Jiminit22, Ghost Screaming in Haunted Hotel, strongly indicating it was a staged production. Despite being widely considered a fake, the Wingate Hotel video remains one of the most effective and unsettling pieces of found footage on the internet. It's a masterclass in building tension, and a perfect example of how a well-crafted story can become a modern ghost legend. From convincing hoaxes to genuinely puzzling clips, this kind of footage taps into our fear of the unknown. They're the glitches in our 24/7 surveillance world, leaving us to debate what's real, what's fake, and what might be lurking just out of sight. What do you think is going on in these videos? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe to Halfway Dark, the man who only appears in emergency exit stairwells. They tell you these stairwells are for your safety. A guaranteed way out when the alarms blare and the panic sets in. Concrete and steel, designed to deliver you from chaos. But what happens when the real emergency isn't the fire, but the figure who waits in that cold, echoing quiet? What happens when the way out becomes the trap? This is the story of the man who only appears in emergency exit stairwells, and the one person who discovered that some emergencies you can't escape. My name is Alex, or at least, that's what we'll go with. The story I'm about to share is one I've never told anyone. Not my family, not my friends, and definitely not a therapist. You can't explain something like this without sounding like you've completely lost your mind. And maybe I have. For 5 years, I was a graphic designer in a 20-story office building downtown. It was a decent job, but the hours were long. I was often one of the last to leave, usually long after the sun had gone down and the city had settled into its nightly rhythm. My ritual was always the same. I'd pack my bag, walk past the elevators that had been powered down for the night, and push open the heavy metal door to the emergency stairwell. The elevators were slow and always packed with the last few people from the day shift. The stairs were just faster, emptier. They were my private path from the sterile, recycled air of the office to the cool freedom of the street below. 19 flights of poured concrete and cold steel. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic slap of my own shoes, echoing in the quiet. The air always had the same smell, a mix of dust, faint chemical cleaner, and that unique, damp cold that clings to concrete that never sees the sun. It was just a utility, a place that was neither here nor there. I never gave it a second thought. That was my first mistake. It started on a Tuesday in late October. I was on a tight deadline, and by the time I left, the entire floor was dark and silent. I pushed into the stairwell, the door sighing shut behind me, sealing me in with that familiar hum and echo. I was on autopilot, my mind still spinning with color palettes and font pairings. I was about halfway down, somewhere around the 10th floor landing, when I saw him. On the flight of stairs right below me, a man was standing perfectly still with his back to me. He was just there, motionless. He was wearing a dark, heavy-looking coat, the kind you don't see much anymore in dark pants. His posture was just unnaturally rigid. My first thought was security, but they wore bright blue uniforms. Maybe just someone from another floor, taking a break. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding loud and wrong in the enclosed space. He didn't move. Not a twitch. A little unnerved, I kept walking down. As I stepped onto the landing where he'd just been, I glanced up. He was gone. There was no sound of a door opening or closing, no sound of hurried footsteps. He had just vanished in the time it took me to blink. I stood there for a full minute, just listening. Nothing but the low buzz of the lights. I shook my head, blaming it on being tired. It was late. My eyes were playing tricks on me. They had to be. A week went by. I'd pretty much forgotten the strange non-incident. Then, on a Friday, it happened again. This time, he was closer. I pushed through the door on the 19th floor and saw him right away, just one flight down, standing on the 18th floor landing. He was turned a little to the side, just staring at the ground. A sudden, piercing cold washed over me. It was the kind of cold that has nothing to do with the temperature of a room, but a deep primal chill that gets right into your bones. I froze. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was just some guy. But another, older part of me, the part that understands shadows and the things that watch from the dark, knew better. I didn't say anything this time. I couldn't. My throat was tight with a fear I couldn't even name. I backed away slowly, pulled the heavy door open, and practically ran to the elevators, stabbing the button like my life depended on it. I rode down with two chatty janitors, and the cheesy elevator music was a sick, cheerful soundtrack to the frantic pounding in my chest. After that, I avoided the stairs. I took the slow, crowded elevator every single night, no matter how long it took. I started leaving earlier, making up excuses to get out of the building while it was still full of people. My coworkers noticed. I got jumpy, irritable. I couldn't focus. How do you even begin to explain that you're terrified of a staircase? The obsession took over. I'd waste hours online, falling down rabbit holes of paranormal forums and urban legends. I read about shadow people, these dark figures people see out of the corner of their eye. I read about time slips, strange apparitions from other eras that appear for a split second. And I read about liminal spaces, places of transition, like hallways, waiting rooms, and stairwells, where the veil between worlds is supposedly thin. The descriptions were a perfect match. The feeling of being watched, the unnatural cold, the figure that was there and then just wasn't. One rainy Thursday, I had to stay late to finish a critical project. By the time I was done, it was after midnight. I walked to the elevators and found a handwritten out-of-order sign taped across the doors. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, washed over me. I had no other choice. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed open the stairwell door. The silence in there felt different this time, heavier, expectant. I took the steps 2 at a time, my shoes making loud, panicked slaps against the concrete. I didn't look down, didn't look back. I just stared at the steps right in front of me. I made it to the 3rd floor landing, but a noise from above made me stop dead. A soft scrape. I looked up. There, on the landing of the 5th floor, stood the man. He was looking right at me. His face was in shadow, just a dark, indistinct smudge where his features should have been. But I felt his gaze on me like a physical weight. He slowly, deliberately, lifted his head. I didn't see eyes, but I felt them. I felt a complete void, an utter lack of everything. That broke me. I scrambled, my feet tangling beneath me, and half ran, half fell down the last few flights. I slammed my shoulder into the push bar of the ground floor exit and burst out into the rain-slicked quiet of the empty street, just gasping for air. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain in a place you thought was safe? Let me know in the comments below. And if you find a strange comfort in the unsettling, make sure you subscribe for more stories that linger in the dark. For 2 years, I didn't see him again. I quit that job the very next day. I found a new gig in a modern low-rise building across town. No tall stairwells, no late nights. I started to believe I was safe, that whatever had haunted that specific place was just a crazy story I'd take to my grave. Then came the day of the fire alarm. It wasn't a drill. A shrill, deafening siren blared through the office, as the emergency lights kicked on. People started moving, a river of controlled panic flowing toward the exits. The elevators automatically shut down. We were all funneled toward the main emergency stairwell. A stairwell I had never once used, never even seen. I was swept along with the crowd. The adrenaline of a real emergency drowned out my own private terror, just for a moment. There's safety in numbers, I told myself. He only appears when you're alone. The stairwell was brightly lit, wider than the one in my old building, and filled with the reassuring sounds of my coworkers. We descended. 5th floor, 4th floor. Then, with a loud clank, the main lights went out, plunging us into the dim, hellish red of the backup lighting. The controlled panic frayed. People started pushing, their voices sharp with fear. In the chaos, I was shoved against the wall as the main group surged ahead of me. For just a few seconds, I was alone on a landing between flights. And he was there. He wasn't on the flight below or the flight above. He was standing 3 steps down from me, in my path, blocking my escape. The red emergency light cast him in a terrifying silhouette, but I knew it was him. The same heavy coat, the same rigid stillness. This time, he was facing me. The noise of the crowd and the piercing alarm seemed to melt away, replaced by a roaring in my ears. The air turned instantly, bitingly cold. I tried to scream, but my lungs felt like they were full of ice. I was paralyzed, trapped not just in a building, but in my own personal nightmare, made real. He lifted a hand, palm facing me, not as a threat, but like a gesture to stop, to wait. And in that awful moment, I understood. The fire wasn't the emergency. It was just the trigger. The stairwell wasn't the way out. It was the trap. He was the emergency. This place, built for safety, was his hunting ground. The door at the bottom seemed to stretch away from me, the distance becoming impossibly vast, like a looping, endless staircase in a nightmare. Something primal inside me snapped. A surge of pure animal terror broke through the paralysis. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged forward, shoving past him. The touch of his coat was like plunging my hand into a bucket of ice, and static, a burning, painful cold shot up my arm. I didn't look back. I flew down the remaining stairs, my shoulders screaming, and crashed through the exit door into the bright, chaotic afternoon. Outside, firefighters were swarming the building. The fire, it turned out, was small. A minor electrical issue in a server room that was already contained. Everyone was safe. I just stood there, shivering in the warm afternoon, the phantom cold still clinging to my shoulder. I searched the faces in the evacuated crowd, my heart pounding with a new kind of fear. He wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He only appears in emergency exit stairwells. I went home and never went back. I told my boss I was taking personal leave and just never returned his calls. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't set foot in that building again. I broke my lease, packed 2 suitcases, and moved to a small town hundreds of miles away. I found a remote job and bought a single-story house. No stairs, no elevators, no shared, forgotten spaces. For a while, there was peace. 5 years have passed. The memory has mostly faded, becoming like a bad dream, terrifying, but distant. I've convinced myself it was just a product of stress and burnout, some kind of psychological break. I am safe. I am grounded. Yesterday, I had to go to my company's local satellite office to sign some paperwork. It's a small, 2-story building on a quiet street. As I was leaving, my manager walked me out. We passed the door to the emergency exit, a small, unassuming stairwell that led right to the parking lot. Just 2 short flights of steps. For a reason I still can't explain, morbid curiosity, maybe, or a desperate need to prove to myself that it was all finally over, I glanced through the small wire glass window in the door. He was there, standing on the tiny landing between the 2 flights, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a single bare bulb, waiting. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he could feel me there. My blood ran cold. A quiet, horrifying certainty settled deep in my gut. It was never about the first building. It wasn't a ghost tied to a place. It was tied to the idea of a place. He doesn't haunt a building. He haunts the emergency. He haunts the escape. And no matter where I go, for the rest of my life, he'll always be there. Just one crisis away, waiting for me in the place you're supposed to run to for safety. Waiting for me in the stairs.